Welcome, sophomores, to Unit 2, the Reformation and Religious Wars. Hopefully you are now experts, or you became experts again on Unit 1, the Renaissance. Now we can move on to Unit 2, the Reformation, which seems to be an easier topic for you all, maybe because of the debate we did. I don't know, but let's go ahead and get started. So let's set the stage. It is the Renaissance, mid 1500s, and everyone is starting to start thinking on their own. Okay, they're still very religious, but now they're seeing things through their own eyes. For example, right now in the Catholic Church, you had large amounts of popes that were acting very badly. For example, the Borgia popes. Caesar Borgia, for example, was a pope who was married, who had children, who had mistresses and everything, but yet he was the head of the Catholic Church. When a pope should be celibate, the pope should be godlike. He was anything but. He ordered killings of large amounts of people, and you had other Catholic leaders that were not following the Bible. Okay, so then you're going to start having people that are going to start questioning the Catholic Church. Okay, what really started happening was when at the Vatican they needed money to renovate the church there. They sent priests, including Johann Tetzel, to go around and collect donations called indulgences. Okay, Johann Tetzel would go around and say, "Hey, if you give us money, we're going to take your sins away." So people that could maybe commit adultery, commit murder, they just pay a donation to the church called an indulgence, and they supposedly got their sins washed away. You could also do the same thing for people that had just died. If they were bad people, well, then you give the donation to the church and they get a fast pass to heaven, basically. Okay, instead of staying in purgatory or going to hell. Well, you're gonna have people that saw this and they're like, wait a second, that's not in the Bible. That's not something that's right. You add that with the donation of Constantine, okay, then people are starting to question the leaders of the Catholic Church, including one priest by the name of Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a very religious man in northern Germany. He was a priest of the Catholic Church, and he got really angry when Johann Tetzel went around and tried to basically have people sell their sin or wash away their sins by giving him money. Okay, so Martin Luther said, wait a second, I'm going to look at the Bible, I'm going to read it from cover to cover and make a list of things that the church is doing that's not in the Bible. Okay, now remember, he did not have, prior to Johann Tetzel's selling of indulgences, he was very religious. He was part of the Catholic Church, but he just was so upset at what some of the leaders were doing. Okay, he was not trying to be very secular. He wasn't trying to be very anti-religious, but he was just being basically wanting to be a better Christian. Okay, so he read the book from cover to cover, and he said, the Bible is the only true word of God, not church. Okay, so he came up with a list. He came up with 95 things, what he titled the 95 Theses, that basically said that these are the things that are in the Bible that is not necessarily practiced by the church. For example, he believed in salvation by faith alone. He said, according to the Bible, you just had to believe in God to get to heaven. But the Catholic Church was like, whoa, 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 hold your horses. You have to believe in church and do good deeds. Now, there's also 7 other sacraments that you have to do or you have to do majority of them within the Catholic Church. But in the Bible, they only talk about 2, baptism and the Eucharist. So, and Martin Luther said, okay, well, there should only be 2 sacraments that people have to accomplish. He also believed in basically the Bible being the only word, that there's no need for a pope to decipher the Bible. Let everyone read the Bible. At this time, the Catholic Church did not allow anybody to read the Bible unless you were a priest. Now, let's also be honest. Very few people could read at this point, only the wealthiest. So even if you had a Bible, you couldn't really do anything with it. Okay, so he's going to create this list, Within this list is, along with his ideas, he's going to create the church of believers, where he believed that, or the priesthood of all believers, where he said that there should not be one person that dictates what happens in the church. He says all the men within the church should help make decisions to run the church, not one individual person. He also believed that clergy should marry. He believed in consubstantiation, not transubstantiation. Transubstantiation in the Catholic Church is that basically during Mass, when the priest says, "This is my body, I give it up for you. This is my blood, I give it up for you," the bells ring. Well, supposedly the bread and wine turns into the body and blood of Christ. That's called transubstantiation. Martin Luther says, no, doesn't believe that. He believes in consubstantiation. And consubstantiation is basically God is present, but nothing actually physically turns. Bread and wine does not turn to him. Okay? Well, of course, the Catholic Church is not going to like this. He gets excommunicated. And a lot of his followers say, hey, this is a way that maybe we can go ahead and get our independence. So some peasants in Germany are going to start revolting in 1525, where they're going to use Luther's teachings of challenging the leadership, okay, but also incorporate economic problems that they're having, like high rents, low pay, all that kind of stuff, and they start revolting. The problem is that Martin Luther is protected by the Pope. Martin Luther is protected by nobles, because in Germany, the further away you are from Rome, in Germany, the more likely the German nobles are like, hey, let's weaken the Catholic Church so that we could get more power. So they actually sided with Luther, thinking that they could challenge the Catholic Church and usurp some of the power that the Catholic Church had. Well, by the end of this German peasant revolt, it lasts a couple of years. Luther actually is going to denounce them, because these peasants are going against the people that are protecting Martin Luther, the nobles. So he denounces them. He says, these are they're taking my words and twisting them. So he gives permission for the peasants to be crushed. This upsets people, but in reality, you have to see where he's coming from, because without protection, there wouldn't be a Lutheran religion, and there wouldn't be a Martin Luther. Now, Martin Luther does eventually get excommunicated in the Diet of Worms, and he starts his own religion. Eventually, it's going to be called Lutheranism. Well, wars are going to be fought from really the 1520s through 1555 in Germany between the Catholics and the Lutherans. Finally, in 1555, a date you need to know, the Peace of Augsburg is signed. That basically says that rulers can choose between being Roman Catholic or Lutheran within the HRE at this time. Nowhere outside the HRE does this apply. So, once Martin Luther gets excommunicated from the Catholic Church, okay, you have two religions. You have the Roman Catholic religion, you have the Protestant religion, okay? There's only two religions, basically. Okay, Protestantism is basically anybody that was a follower of Martin Luther. The word Protestant comes from the word protest, people that protested against the Catholic Church. Okay, so these other reformers like John Calvin, the Anabaptists, Erling Zwingli, and others are all going to be followers of Martin Luther. But the problem is that a lot of these other reformers had other ideas about how to run the church, their beliefs of what happens in Mass, and the role of the church. One person in particular is a guy by the name of John Calvin, creator of, go figure, Calvinism. He wanted to create a theocracy where basically the church and state is one. Okay, he believed that humans are just naturally bad people and that God is great. And his religion is going to be a mixture of economics and religion. He said God has already chosen who's going to go to heaven, okay, and who's going to go to hell. Okay, there's no such thing as purgatory under John Calvin. And those people that God has selected to go to heaven are called the predestined, or the elect. That they have been elected by God to go to heaven even before they're born. Okay? Everyone else is probably going to go to hell. But they could possibly, but you don't know if you're going to go to heaven or hell, so you have to act like you're one of the predestined. Okay, so the idea is you live a good life, you work hard, etc. Okay, under John Calvin's rule, you work hard. The harder you work, the more money you make, you're showing God that you are worthy to get to heaven. Okay, John Calvin's ideas in his book Institutes of the Christian Religion really show his ideas about, okay, working hard, predestined. He believes that God is present. It's more like a memorial to God in Mass, but he's not actually there, or he doesn't actually, nothing actually changes. But John Calvin's religion is going to be one of the most popular religions out there, okay? And it spreads quite quickly, mainly because of the economic aspects of this. For example, okay, John Calvin's idea starts off with in Geneva, Switzerland, and will spread to other areas, where in Scotland, Calvinism is called Presbyterianism. In France, it's called the Huguenot religion, and in England, it's called the Puritan religion. Okay, these are people who live very close to the Bible, not as close as the Anabaptists, but very close to the Bible, work 6 days a week, go to church 7 days a week, and focus on being a good individual. There's strict laws that they have to follow, so that they cannot have the devil come inside of them, like no drinking, no dancing, no singing, etc. Okay. So, with that said, then it becomes very popular because of this religion, because of the religion being so closely tied to economics. Okay. Another religion that's the most radical religion is the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists, mainly led by Thomas Munster, but there's other leaders as well. They live a life that's truly from the Bible. Okay, if it's not in the Bible, they cannot do it. Okay, these are your Mennonites. These are your Amish. They totally oppose infant baptism. They said somebody should know the difference between right and wrong before that they could officially enter the church. So they oppose infant baptism. They believe in total separation of church and state. They are going to be persecuted in society because of their what's considered more radical beliefs, but they are going to be in Germany and other areas of Europe as well. Well, so we talked about Martin Luther, we talked about John Calvin, we talked about the Anabaptists. These are all the Reformation within the HRE, the Holy Roman Empire, and eventually spreads to the rest of the continent as well as in England. Those were all religions that were set up because of differences in ideologies, in religious ideas and actions. There was one religion that was not about religion at all, actually, that was created. It was a religion that was set up because of political reasons, and that's the Anglican Church in England. Henry VIII was a man who thought he was man's gift to women. He was very religious. He was given the title by the Pope, Defender of the Faith. Okay, he was married to a woman by the name of Catherine of Aragon, who was the daughter of Ferdinand Isabella of Spain, and they were married for like 20 plus years. But she kept on getting pregnant, but she kept on miscarriaging. She had one child that was able to live to adulthood, or to actually more than a couple years old, and that was a girl by the name of Mary. Okay, Mary Tudor is going to be her name. The problem is that Henry VIII needed a son. Okay, a son will solidify the heir to the throne because he wanted the Tudor family to stay on the throne of England. Remember, Henry VIII is the second Tudor. Henry VII was the first Tudor king, his father, and now he's going to be the second one. So he figured, okay, Catherine of Aragon is getting kind of old, and she's having too many miscarriages. Okay, now of course he thinks that Catherine of Aragon tricked him, because if you remember, Catherine of Aragon was actually married to Henry VIII's brother. Okay, But when the brother dies, Isabel and Ferdinand of Spain and Henry VII decide, let's keep the marriage between the two families together. So let's have Catherine marry Henry VIII, who eventually becomes Henry VIII. Okay, so keep it within the family. Supposedly they never consummated the relationship. Who knows? But so now Henry VIII, after 20 years or so of marriage, thinks that maybe this was a mistake, because in the Bible it says you cannot covet your brother's wife. And so he starts thinking that maybe Catherine did have relations, did play Scrabble with his brother, Arthur. So he thinks God is punishing him for not getting a male heir. So finally, he asks the Pope for a divorce. The Pope says no, because at this point, Catherine of Aragon, her nephew is Charles V of the HRE, who, remember, the HRE is the muscles of the Catholic Church. They're the ones that are basically, Charles V is the one that's protecting the Catholic Church against anybody in war. So so the Pope cannot make Charles V angry by saying his aunt is now going to be a divorcee, because by this time she's old and she's not going to be able to marry again. She's like 40 some odd years old. Okay, so she's not going to be able to marry now. So he says no to the divorce, and Henry VIII is like, no one ever tells me no. Okay, no one ever tells me no. So Pope Clement VII basically says, no, this is not going to happen. You cannot divorce, and I'm telling you, you cannot do this. Henry VIII is just like, yeah, whatever. Okay, so what Henry VIII says, if you're not going to give me a divorce, I'm going to divorce England from the Catholic Church. And that's exactly what happens in 1534 with what's called the Act of Supremacy, where basically England is now going to be divorced from the Catholic Church, and now a new church is going to be formed called the Church of England, also called the Anglican Church. Okay, then at this point, the Anglican Church is exactly the same as the Catholic Church, with one exception. The king is going to be the ruler of the church. Okay, so now instead of the Pope, you have the king, and Henry VIII is now the head of the church. He gives himself a divorce, he annuls the marriage, okay, and basically marries his second wife, who's already pregnant. I know, shocker. But Anne Boleyn. So Anne Boleyn is now his second wife, and we know that basically she has a kid. It's another girl. But Anne Boleyn is like in her earlier mid-teens, so she's going to have plenty of more kids. She gets pregnant 2 more times in miscarriages. Well, and that's going to end her faith. Not faith. That's going to end her life. Anyway, so really focusing on the Anglican Church, basically. With the Act of Supremacy of 1534, Henry becomes the protector and the head of the church. Basically says the Catholic teachings are correct. He rejects the Protestant ideas that Martin Luther is spreading at this time. He totally rejects Martin Luther. Okay, but they do have one thing in common. Martin Luther and Henry VIII, both reject papal supremacy. Okay, but for different reasons. Now, to help pay for this new church and to help pay for this, Henry VIII is going to start selling the Catholic monasteries, the Catholic churches, the Catholic land to nobility and others for 2 reasons. He needed money, and he also wanted their support. The church had some of the greatest lands in England, so by selling some of that land to the nobles will support Henry VIII. Smart guy, if you think about it. Okay, well, eventually Henry VIII dies. He does have one male child, Edward VI, with his 3rd wife. Okay, so Edward does become the next in line to the throne. He is raised a very strict Protestant, kind of like a Calvinist type of Protestant, so a Presbyterian. Okay, and he changes the Anglican Church to become very Protestant, like a Calvinist. Starts whitewashing the churches and does everything that you'd find in the Calvinist church. When he dies early on, he's a teenager when he dies. His half-sister comes to power, Mary the First, or Bloody Mary. She's a staunch Catholic, and she wants to get revenge for what happened to her mother. Okay, so she takes the Anglican Church and wants to make it Catholic again. Unfortunately, she dies of a tumor, and her half-sister comes to power, and that's Elizabeth I. Now, Elizabeth I will create a grand bargaining where it kind of meets in the middle with the Anglican Church. It's going to have mixture of the Catholic Church, mixture of Protestant churches coming together. Okay, it's a settlement that kind of makes the majority of the people happy. It does not make the extremes happy because the uber Catholics and the uber Anabaptist Puritans hated this, but at least the majority of the people can live with it. Okay, so it's very similar. It's a middle ground between the Catholics and the Protestants. Okay, I think before we move on, I think you should really be able to be able to differentiate Henry VIII and Martin Luther for their motives, for their reasoning behind their reformations, etc. Also look at Elizabeth and Isabel of Spain. Isabella was very Roman Catholic, did the persecution of Jews and Muslims, whereas Elizabeth was more moderate. Really differentiate between Henry VIII and Martin Luther, and Elizabeth and Isabella. These next few slides show some of the 6 different religions that we've looked at: Roman Catholic, Anglican, Lutheran, Calvinist, Zwingli, and Anabaptist, and some of their differences in their beliefs. Review these. These do come from the College Board, so it's basically what the College Board says you need to know. So, with all these new religions that are being formed, the Catholic Church starts realizing, oh crud, we need to focus and we need to reform. Unfortunately, it's too little too late, but because you do have the rise of all the different Protestant religions, but they will try to reform. Pope Paul III is probably the most important pope when it comes to Reformation and challenging the Protestantism, because he is going to start the reform process of, okay, prior to this, the church focused on power, money, and art. Okay, now the Pope Paul III says, no, we need to focus mainly on what we're supposed to be doing: spreading religious ideas, getting people ready for the afterlife, etc. Okay, so in 1545, Pope Paul III is going to convene the Council of Trent, and for the next 20 or so years, this council is going to meet to really start reforming the church. What is important about this is that the Catholic Church will not change any of its doctrines or ideas, but it will change some of its practices. They still believe in salvation by faith and good works. They believed in all 7 sacraments. They believed in the celibacy of the clergy, okay, having monasteries, having nuns, all that. They created something called the Index of Forbidden Books list. So this is any book that basically went against church's teachings, they would put on this list, and it was outlawed for any Catholic to ever read these books. Okay, but again, no doctrines have been changed. Okay, now it does going to curtail the sale of indulgences. Okay, now you cannot just pay away your sins. Okay, and to wash away your sins. It's going to eliminate the selling of church offices, simony and nepotism, and all that kind of good stuff that we talked about earlier on in the year. Okay. Along with the Council of Trent and the reforms that they made, they also are going to create new religious orders like the Jesuits. The Jesuits are going to be founded by Ignatius of Loyola, who is going to be an individual who believes in spreading Christian education. So by um, by teaching people to be better Roman Catholics, that'll hopefully also inform and reform the Catholic Church. Okay, so reform the Catholic Church through teachings. Now, um, it'll also help create schools around the world, and we saw Jesuit schools created even to this day. By creating these schools, hopefully it was to fight Protestantism. Okay, now the Jesuits were the uber Catholics. These were the ones that persecuted Jews, did persecute Muslims in Spain and Italy and other places. So even though their focus is on religion, they are also focusing on spreading the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church's power over Protestantism. So if you were to ask, what is the importance of the Reformation? There's so much that you could talk about. You could talk about the role of women. You could talk about the role of religion. You could talk about the role of Protestantism versus Catholicism. There's so much to talk about. First off, for the first time since antiquity, the unity of Western Christianity has been shattered. Now you're going to have parts of Europe that are Protestant, parts of Europe that is Roman Catholic. So remember, the closer you are to Rome, the more likely you're going to be Roman Catholic. The further away from Rome you are, the more likely you're going to be one of the Protestant religions. Okay, and there's a plethora of Protestant religions. Everything from Lutheranism to Calvinism to Anglican to Zwinglius to the Anabaptists, etc. Okay, so religious enthusiasm is going to really start kicking in. Okay, so people are moving back to the church, even though, let's be honest, it's still, people are very religious at this point. They never really truly moved away too far from religion. Okay, many of the abuses by the Catholic Church will be remedied. Pluralism, immoral and uneducated clergy are going to be removed and trained and go to seminary schools. Simony, which is the buying of church offices, is going to be eliminated. Okay, but one of the negatives is that it does lead to war, religious wars. Okay, now some other things that will happen because of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. Baroque art is going to be big during the Counter-Reformation. Baroque art is going to use to support the Catholic Reformation, to show the power, the wealth, the glory of the Roman Catholic religion. So people were to be awed when they walked into the churches, and that was hopefully to keep the Catholics from turning into Protestants. Okay, it was to stimulate piety and goodness and all that kind of good stuff. But also there's a change for women at this time period. Okay, now there's for women, there is a difference between Renaissance women and Reformation women, but we'll talk about that in a second. During the Reformation period, women are going to start having more marriages that are based on love. This is the lower classes mainly. People are going to start marrying not for economic reasons or political reasons. It's mainly going to be for love. Okay. Being a wife is good. Okay, doing wifely duties, taking care of the husband, the children, the house, etc., is supposedly good. You're there to help teach the stories of the Bible to your children. Protestant women are going to be able to read the Bible to their children. Okay, so their role is to teach kids, to educate kids, and to teach them to be better Christians once they grow up. Women, of course, are subordinate to men. That doesn't really change. It won't change until really late 1800s. Okay, in the Roman Catholic Church, the Ursuline Order, the Ursuline Order, okay, which is basically the Jesuit form, or a woman's version of the Jesuits. Their goals are to provide education to mainly women, to girls. Okay, so when you look at the Reformation compared to the Renaissance for women, there's a big difference. In the Reformation, most women are affected, whether you're upper class, lower class, middle class, Catholic, Anglican, Lutheran, whatever. Every woman is somehow affected. Whereas in the Renaissance, only the upper class women are really affected. Most normal people are not really being affected by the Renaissance at all. They don't probably even know what's going on. So, with the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation occurring, now we move on to religious wars. Okay, there are three major religious wars that we're going to focus on: the Spanish religious war, the French religious war, and of course the 30 Years' War. On this slide, you see some examples of some of the major fighting that's occurring on the continent. Of course, Spain, who is uber Catholic at this point, trying to fight against those that are non-Catholic. You have the French Catholics, the Valois family in France, who are trying to keep their power as they go against the Huguenots. You have within the HRE, you have the Catholic kings trying to usurp their power and try to eliminate the Protestant kings. And of course, the Pope is behind that. So you have a lot of issues going on the continent when it comes to religious wars. As we review the different religious wars, it is important to understand that you do not need to know every single step within the war. Just understand why it was fought, any major issues that occurred, and the overall outcome. Okay, how did it affect all the countries involved, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the Spanish religious wars. The current king of Spain is a guy by the name of Philip II. He is the uber Christian, uber Catholic, who felt that his goal in life was to eliminate every single non-Roman Catholic in the world. He was considered the defender of Christianity. He's the son of Charles V. He becomes famous in the Battle of Lepanto, which pushed the Ottomans out of Central Europe. So when he becomes king of Spain, when his father retires, he doesn't understand that how his different areas that he now controls has been living. For example, yes, Spain is extremely Roman Catholic, but he also inherited the lowland countries, which would be modern-day Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, who, under his father, Charles V, they were ruled very leniently. They made a large amount of money for Charles V, so he kind of left them alone. They practiced religious tolerance, they had low taxes, they pretty much had lots of freedom in there because they were making so much money for the kingdom. Well, when Philip II becomes the king of Spain and he inherits this land from his father, he didn't understand why they should have these freedoms. So he tells the lowland countries that he is going to enforce these new laws of getting rid of all religious freedom and will now only allow people to practice the Roman Catholic Church or Roman Catholic religion. Also, he's going to raise taxes and pretty much just generally curtail all freedoms that they had. Okay, well, that's just like you basically, you have all this freedom as a child, and then your parents taking it all away for no reason. You'd really be upset. Well, that's what's going to happen here, and the people of the lowland countries are going to be very upset. Well, the head, the leader of the Protestant religion of the area, a guy by the name of William of Orange, is really going to lead the fight against Philip II of Spain. And you have a series of battles that are fought, the Dutch revolts, where hundreds of people are going to die. Some are going to be forced to convert to Catholicism. Some people actually in protest will convert to the Calvinist religion, which is the official religion of the area. Well, what's going to happen is the lowland countries are going to split into two parts. Those that are loyal to Philip II and those that are loyal to William of Orange, which are the more Protestant areas. So the northern part of the lowland countries are going to be controlled by the armies of William of Orange, okay? And the lower part, which is modern day Belgium, will still remain loyal to Philip II because they're mainly Roman Catholic. Well, the Protestants of the area are going to get a lot of help from one country in particular. That country, of course, being England. Elizabeth is going to send money, supplies, and such to the people to combat Philip II, who is not very favorable toward Elizabeth. Elizabeth and Philip hate each other. Well, when Philip gets word of this, basically Philip and England, or Spain and England, will declare war on each other, and their battle will be against each other's navies off the coast of England. Well, unbeknownst to Philip, the English Navy know how to sail their ships off the coast of England and understand the weather that is located there. The Spanish did not. So what's going to happen is that, unfortunately for Spain and Philip II, they're going to lose. Okay, and the English will win. This will eventually lead to the end of the Dutch-Spanish religious wars, and pretty much the lowland countries will, for the most part, become semi-independent from Spain. The area that we now call Belgium will remain loyal to Spain, whereas the rest will become semi-independent, for now at least. So at the end of this, England and Dutch, the English and the Dutch, they're going to become really buddy-buddy when it comes to trading, and they're going to be trading partners. So they both are very successful. And Spain, though, from this point onward, will no longer be a major power. When they lost against England, and that Philip II spent so much money on these wars, it pretty much ends the superiority of Spain as a major country in Europe. So Spain goes down, the Dutch and the English go up when it comes to political power due to this religious war. So let's go ahead and move on to France. In France, the religious war is, of course, religious, but it's also political. The current ruling family are the Valois. Okay, and Henry Valois had just died, and he left his throne to his oldest son, who's just a teenager, if that. So he's going to rule with his mother, Catherine de' Medici. Well, because he's a boy king, some top noble families are going to be like, hey, this is a way to get some power. Okay. Two noble families in particular, the Guise family and the Bourbon family, are going to really try to threaten the Valois rule because they want to rule the country themselves. The Guise family, Guise, are uber Catholics, okay, and they have no appetite for anybody that is not Roman Catholic. So they are okay with killing anybody that is not Roman Catholic or forcing them to convert. On the other hand, the Bourbon family, or the Bourbon family, led by Henry of Navarre, he is Protestant, but he's not an uber Protestant. Okay, he's not a militant Protestant who said that all Catholics must die. That's not him. He's just a Protestant, and he's like, I don't care about religion that much. I just want to become king. So you're going to have, in the mid to late 1500s, you're going to have a civil war that occurs in France between the Catholics and the Huguenots. Huguenots are basically your Calvinists, or your French Calvinists, okay? And the Civil War really engulfs France. Well, Catherine de' Medici says, okay, we need to stop this. We need to bring peace We need to stop this, or my family won't rule and France will crumble. So she comes up with a plan. One of her daughters needs a husband, and Henry of Navarre needs a wife. So even though their ages are a little bit different, um, she comes up with a plan to marry the two. And this would unite a Catholic family and a Protestant family. And by doing this, this maybe would bring peace to France. Well, in a week-long celebration called uh, um, St. Bartholomew Day, which is occurring during this time period, but it is a week-long celebration. Catherine comes up with a plan where Henry of Guise will come in with his military and kill all the Huguenots that are celebrating the marriage and the unification of these two families. Of course, Catherine de' Medici totally doesn't say that this was her idea. Okay, she's like, I have no clue what's happening. This must be the crazy Guise family. Well, in the St. Bartholomew Day massacre, this is the killing of about 20,000 Huguenots. Okay, think about that. 20,000 people are going to die just because they're Huguenots. Okay, but the problem with this is that it doesn't end this war. The leaders of all the three different families are not dead. Henry of Navarre, Henry of Guise, and Henry Valois, they're still alive. So there comes another plan, and it's going to be called the War of Three Henrys. Henry Valois, the current king of France, is going to team up with Henry of Navarre of the Bourbon family, and their goal is to basically kill off Henry of Guise. Okay, and if they pull it off, and if Henry of Valois doesn't have any children, then Henry of Navarre will become king. Well, what's going to happen here is, yes, they do poison Henry of Guise, and now the Guise family is gone. But Henry of Navarre is going to be stabbed to death shortly after, which only leaves Henry of Navarre left. And Henry, because of the agreement that they had, Henry of Navarre becomes king. Well, here's the thing. France is a predominantly Catholic country. So Henry of Navarre says, you know what? I'm going to switch religions just to bring peace to my people, because Paris is worth a mass. So that basically means is that he's converting his religion to Catholicism, okay, to bring peace to his country. And he'll eventually sign the Edict of Nantes in 1598, which basically allows both the Roman Catholic religions and the Huguenot religion to practice freely, with a few exceptions, but for the most part, there is pretty much 100% religious freedom. Our final religious war is the 30 Years' War. Okay, notice the dates. That date is important. The ending date, 1648. That's a date you definitely need to know. So, this war starts off as a religious war, but basically ends as a political war. Very similar to the French War of Religion. So, what's going to happen here? Within the border of the HRE, even though the Peace of Augsburg was meant to maintain peace between the Catholics and the Protestants, it didn't, because the Peace of Augsburg failed to recognize any Protestant religion other than the Lutheran religion. So Calvinists, Anabaptists, etc. did not have a say, and they cannot be chosen as an official religion of any state within the HRE. Okay? Well, the Catholics basically wanted to get rid of all Protestants. The Protestants wanted to have total freedom from the Catholics, even though it is within the HRE, which is controlled by the Catholic Church. Well, in the 30 Years' War, there are 4 phases in this war. Think of Butts Don't Smell Fresh: Bohemian, Danish, Swedish, French. Okay, in the Bohemian phase, what's going to happen in this is totally religious. Okay, this is basically where the Catholics and the Protestants within Bohemia start a war after the defenestration of Prague, where Catholic tax collectors are thrown out the window. Okay, the Bohemian phase starts, and what's going to happen is that it is basically going to be a Catholic win for, or it's going to be a win for the Catholics. Okay. In the second phase, again, it's another religious phase. And this time, though, it moves out of just Bohemia into the Danish areas and other areas. Okay. The Catholic general, a guy by the name of General Wallenstein, is really going to be the deciding factor in having the Catholics beat the Protestants. Okay, Wallenstein was this ruthless individual who basically did won battles by any means necessary. Okay, at the end of this phase, the Edict of Restitution of 1552 basically restores all Catholic lands lost prior to this. So if your land was taken and given to a Protestant, well, you get your land back. That's going to cause a lot of issues because you could say, hey, 50 years ago, my great grandfather's land was taken away and given to the Protestants. I want my land back. Okay, even though you may have never lived on that land, but that is a possibility. Okay, the third phase is the Swedish phase. This is when Gustavus Adolphus comes into play. The Swedish are going to lead the resistance against the Catholics. France will join in as a supporter of Gustavus Adolphus and the Swedes. Okay, and in this war, though, the in this war, you're going to have the Catholics win. Sorry, the Catholics will win. Okay, because Gustavus Adolphus dies. Okay. And so we're basically 3-0, and the Catholics are winning. But finally, in the last phase, which is called the French phase, the French are going to lead the revolt against the HRE, the Habsburgs, of course. And this is when it's totally political, totally political. The French want to destroy the Habsburgs. That's why they joined the side of the Swedes in the third phase. And now in the fourth phase, the French are going to lead the resistance against the Habsburgs. And this is where it gets interesting because you have it's Catholics against Catholics, okay, or Catholics against Catholics and Protestants, okay. And the French though are going to be easily able to defeat the Habsburgs. And at the end of this war, the Peace of Westphalia is going to be signed, okay, in 1648. And the Peace of Westphalia is basically going to say, within the HRE, the ruler decides whatever religion they want. It's not just Catholic or Lutheran, it's Calvinist, it's any religion they want. Okay. The Netherlands officially becomes independent. Switzerland officially becomes independent. Alsace-Lorraine area is now going to be given back to France, which was under the control of Germany. So it's now going back to France after the 30 Years' War. Okay. So what are some causes in this? Or what are some effects or consequences of this? First off, France becomes the superpower of Europe. France is one of the most powerful countries in all of Europe because of this war. Now, the Dutch and the Swedes also become very dominant Lutheran states. And other consequences. You're going to start seeing a decline of the Pope. The Pope's power is going to start waning because first off, the Pope was not invited to the Peace of Westphalia. So he didn't have any say in the writing of this document. So people are going to start moving away from the church. This 30 Years' War will end all religious wars. And really from this point onward, Very little fighting will occur when it comes to religion. Germany, or the HRE, will be devastated, okay, politically, economically, socially. When you have 30 years of fighting in one small area, it's going to be decimated. Think about that. Okay, it's going to be decimated politically, economically, and socially. And eventually they're going to have to come back to, and they will. They'll become strong again. But also with the Treaty of Westphalia, um, you're starting to now move away from just anybody becoming military. Now you're moving toward more professionals that are military. Now you're going to have people that are trained to become or to be military experts. Prior to the 30 Years' War, you didn't really have, no country really had militaries. They just had citizens that were part of the military. So that's another change. But really the biggest change in the HRE is the Cuius Regio, Ius Religio, or whose rules his religion. Basically, within the HRE, the king will choose any religion that they so choose. Okay, and the HRE nor the Pope can do anything about it. So if they want to be Lutheran, if they want to be Calvinist, if they want to be Anabaptist, or whatever, they could do it. Okay, so basically, at the end of the 30 Years' War, okay, the HRE suffers tremendously. France, the Dutch are very successful. The Swedes, I'm going to give them a middle ground. They're not very successful, but they're not bad either. They're middle ground. Okay. Notice one country that's not involved, and that's England. England's going through their own civil war at this time, which is why they did not partake in the 30 Years' War. But no worries, we're going to cover that next unit or next review session. Hopefully you've understood everything that's happening. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. But this is your Religious Wars and the Reformation. Have a good day.